I never expected my quiet life in Thornfield, Minnesota, to turn into a full-blown war with the most insufferable woman I had ever met. But that's exactly what happened when Brenda Patterson decided my snow pile was a crime against humanity. It started on a Tuesday morning in mid-February, right after one of those brutal Midwest snowstorms that dumps 2 feet of white powder on everything in sight. I had spent 3 hours the previous evening clearing my driveway with my trusty snowblower, carefully pushing all the snow to the far right side of my property, well within my boundaries. I'm Aaron Daniels, a 42-year-old mechanical engineer who works from home, and I pride myself on being reasonable, following the rules, and keeping to myself. The last thing I wanted was trouble with anyone in Riverside Estates, the planned community where I had purchased my modest 3-bedroom colonial 5 years ago. But Brenda Patterson, the self-appointed queen of our HOA, had other ideas. I was sitting at my kitchen table with my morning coffee, responding to work emails, when I heard the doorbell ring. Through the frosted glass, I could see a figure in a bright purple parka that could only belong to one person. I took a deep breath, set down my mug, and opened the door. Brenda stood there with her arms crossed, her blonde hair pulled back so tight it looked painful, her lips pursed in that expression of perpetual disapproval she seemed to wear like a badge of honor. She was maybe 50 years old, with sharp features and eyes that constantly scanned for violations of the HOA rules she enforced with religious fervor. "Mr. Daniels," she said, her voice clipped and cold, "we need to discuss your snow removal situation." I glanced past her at my driveway, which was perfectly clear, then back at her. "I'm not sure what you mean. My driveway is clean." "It's not about your driveway," she snapped. "It's about that massive pile of snow you've created on the edge of your property. It's unsightly, it's blocking the view of the street, and it's creating a hazardous situation." I stepped out onto my porch, pulling my fleece tighter against the cold. The temperature was hovering around 15 degrees, and the wind cut right through me. I looked at the snow pile she was referring to. It was substantial, sure, but it was completely on my property, at least 6 feet from the sidewalk, and nowhere near anyone else's space. "Brenda, that snow is entirely on my property. I had to put it somewhere. Where else was I supposed to pile it?" She pulled out her phone and started scrolling through what I assumed were photos. According to Section 4.7 of the HOA bylaws, all snow removal must be conducted in a manner that maintains the aesthetic integrity of the neighborhood. Your pile is visible from the street and creates an eyesore. "An eyesore?" I couldn't help but laugh. "Brenda, everyone on this street has snow piles. It's February in Minnesota. Where exactly do you expect people to put it?" Her face flushed red, and I could see her jaw tighten. "Other residents have managed to distribute their snow more evenly, or they've had it hauled away. Your pile is egregiously large and positioned in a way that reflects poorly on the entire community." I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache coming on. "I'm not paying someone to haul away snow from my own property when I have space for it right there. The pile isn't hurting anyone." Brenda stepped closer, her voice dropping to that dangerous whisper she used when she was really angry. "This is your first and only warning, Mr. Daniels. You have 48 hours to address this situation, or I will be forced to issue a formal violation notice, which comes with a $250 fine. And if you continue to ignore HOA regulations, those fines will increase exponentially." Before I could respond, she turned on her heel and marched back to her silver Lexus SUV, which she had parked directly in front of my house. I watched her drive away, feeling my blood pressure rising. This was exactly the kind of petty nonsense that made me regret ever moving into an HOA-controlled neighborhood. I went back inside and pulled up the HOA bylaws on my computer. I spent the next hour reading through every single section related to snow removal, landscaping, and property maintenance. Nowhere did it specify exactly how snow should be piled, or give any measurements or guidelines beyond the vague language about aesthetic integrity. It was the kind of ambiguous wording that gave people like Brenda unlimited power to harass homeowners over subjective complaints. That evening, I called my neighbor Tom, who lived 3 doors down and had served on the HOA board before Brenda's faction took over. Tom was a retired police officer in his 60s, a straight-talking guy who had warned me about Brenda when I first moved in. "She's targeting you because she can," Tom said when I explained the situation. "Last month she went after the Hendersons for having their trash cans visible from the street for more than 12 hours. Before that, it was the Chavez family for having a garden gnome she deemed inappropriate. Brenda gets off on the power trip. So what do? I asked. I can't afford to keep paying fines just because she doesn't like where I put my snow." Tom was quiet for a moment. "Well, technically, if the snow is on your property and not violating any specific measurable rule, she can't actually fine you. But she'll make your life hell trying. Document everything. Take photos. And if she does issue a fine, you can appeal it to the full board." I thanked Tom and hung up, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't going to end well. Brenda Patterson didn't strike me as the type to back down gracefully. The next morning, I took detailed photographs of my snow pile from multiple angles, including measurements showing it was entirely on my property and not blocking any sidewalks or sightlines for traffic. I also photographed several other properties on my street that had similar or even larger snow piles. If Brenda wanted to play games, I was going to be prepared, but Brenda struck first. When I checked my mailbox that afternoon, I found an official HOA violation notice on thick cream-colored cardstock, with the Riverside Estates logo embossed at the top. The notice stated that I was in violation of Section 4.7 and had 10 days to remedy the situation or face a $250 fine, followed by increasing penalties for continued non-compliance. There was also a note that I was required to attend the next HOA board meeting to discuss the violation. I felt my hands shaking as I read the notice. This was ridiculous. I had done nothing wrong, and now I was being threatened with fines and forced to attend some kangaroo court meeting because Brenda had decided my snow pile offended her delicate sensibilities. I spent the next few days gathering my evidence and preparing my case. I printed out the photos, highlighted the relevant sections of the bylaws, and even researched Minnesota state law regarding HOA enforcement powers. I discovered that HOAs in Minnesota had to follow strict procedures for issuing fines, and that homeowners had the right to contest violations through a formal hearing process. The board meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday evening at 7 o'clock in the community clubhouse, a small building near the neighborhood entrance that was used for events and meetings. I arrived 15 minutes early, wearing a button-down shirt and khakis, carrying a folder with all my documentation. The meeting room was set up with a long table at the front where the board members sat, and several rows of folding chairs for residents. Brenda was already there, sitting in the center of the board table, flanked by 4 other members. I recognized 2 of them. Janet Morrison, a nervous-looking woman in her 40s who always seemed to agree with whatever Brenda said, and Douglas Chen, a younger guy who worked in finance and looked perpetually uncomfortable at these meetings. The other 2 board members were people I had never spoken to before, About a dozen other residents had shown up, most of them probably just there for the entertainment of seeing Brenda go after someone. I took a seat in the second row and waited. Brenda called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of her gavel and began going through the standard agenda items. Approval of last month's minutes, financial report, upcoming events. I sat there listening, my leg bouncing with nervous energy, until finally she reached the point I had been dreading. Item 7 on our agenda, Brenda announced, looking directly at me with a cold smile. The matter of Aaron Daniels and his violation of Section 4.7 regarding snow removal and property aesthetics. I stood up and walked to the front of the room, folder in hand. I'd like to address this violation notice. I believe it's completely without merit. Brenda's smile never wavered. Mr. Daniels, you were warned that your snow pile was unacceptable and given 48 hours to address it. You chose to ignore that warning. This board takes violations seriously. I didn't ignore anything, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. I reviewed the bylaws extensively, and nowhere does it specify any restrictions on how snow should be piled on private property, as long as it's not blocking public areas or creating actual safety hazards. My snow pile meets all those criteria. I opened my folder and began distributing copies of my photos to the board members. As you can see from these photographs, the snow is entirely on my property, well away from the sidewalk, and not blocking any sightlines for traffic. I've also included photos of at least 6 other properties on my street alone that have similar or larger snow piles. Why am I being singled out? Janet Morrison looked uncomfortable as she shuffled through the photos. Douglas Chen was nodding slightly, which I took as a good sign. But Brenda's expression had hardened into something resembling granite. The issue is not simply the size or location of the pile, she said icily. It's the overall aesthetic impact. Your pile is particularly visible from the main street, and it creates an impression of neglect. An impression of neglect. I couldn't keep the disbelief out of my voice. It's a pile of snow from a snowstorm in Minnesota in February. This is absurd. Brenda slammed her hand on the table. Mr. Daniels, I will not tolerate you insulting this board. We are volunteers who dedicate our time to maintaining the property values and quality of life in this community. If you refuse to comply with our reasonable requests, you leave us no choice but to enforce the rules. Douglas Chen cleared his throat. Brenda, I have to say, I'm looking at these photos and I'm not sure I see a clear violation. The bylaw language is pretty vague, and if we're going to start enforcing aesthetic standards for snow piles, we need to have specific, measurable criteria. Otherwise, we're just making arbitrary decisions. I could have hugged him right then, but Brenda shot Douglas a look that could have frozen the sun. The bylaws give this board discretion to determine what constitutes an aesthetic violation. That's the whole point. We use our collective judgment. Collective judgment, I interjected. You made this decision unilaterally before even bringing it to the board. You came to my house and threatened me with fines based on your personal opinion. Brenda's face was now fully red. I did no such thing. I identified a potential violation and followed proper procedures. You gave me 48 hours to fix it or face immediate fines, I countered. That doesn't sound like proper procedure to me, and now you're trying to railroad this through without any real discussion or fair consideration. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Several residents were whispering among themselves, and I could tell that some of them were enjoying the show. Brenda looked like she was about to explode, her knuckles white as she gripped her gavel. Douglas spoke up again. I think we need to table this matter and establish clear guidelines before we can proceed with any enforcement action. It's not fair to fine a resident for violating a standard that doesn't actually exist in writing. Janet Morrison surprised everyone by nodding. I agree. This seems premature. Brenda looked around the table at her fellow board members, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of panic in her eyes. She was losing control of the situation, and she knew it. Fine, she said through gritted teeth. We'll table the matter for now. But Mr. Daniels, I strongly encourage you to address this situation voluntarily, in the spirit of being a good neighbor and community member. I gathered my materials and returned to my seat, feeling a mixture of relief and frustration. I had dodged the immediate bullet, but I knew this wasn't over. Brenda Patterson was not the type of person to forget a perceived slight, and I had just embarrassed her in front of the entire board and a room full of residents. As the meeting wrapped up and people began filing out, Tom caught up with me in the parking lot. That took guts, he said, clapping me on the shoulder. But be careful. Brenda's going to come after you harder now. Let her try, I said, though I didn't feel nearly as confident as I sounded. I'm not going to be bullied into wasting money moving snow around my own property. I drove home feeling emotionally drained. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat in my car for a moment, looking at the infamous snow pile. It really was just a pile of snow, nothing more, nothing less. The fact that this had become such a huge issue was insane. The weekend passed quietly. I spent Saturday catching up on work and Sunday watching the Vikings playoff game and trying not to think about HOA drama. But Monday morning brought a fresh round of trouble. I woke up to find a new notice taped to my front door. This one wasn't from the HOA. It was from the Thornfield City Code Enforcement Office, stating that they had received a complaint about snow blocking the sidewalk in front of my property, and that an inspector would be coming by to assess the situation. I felt my stomach drop. The snow wasn't blocking the sidewalk at all. I had been meticulous about keeping the sidewalk clear. This was Brenda's doing. She had called the city and filed a false complaint to harass me. I immediately went outside and took more photos, documenting that the sidewalk was completely clear. Then I called the number on the notice and left a message explaining that there was no violation and that I believed the complaint was filed in bad faith. The inspector showed up Tuesday afternoon. He was a middle-aged man with a weathered face and a no-nonsense attitude. He introduced himself as Rick Martinez and asked me to show him where the alleged violation was. I walked him around my property, showing him the clear sidewalk and the snow pile that was well within my boundaries. He took his own photos and made notes on a clipboard. "Yeah, there's no violation here," he said, shaking his head. "Sidewalk's clear, snow's on your property. Whoever called this in was either mistaken or had other motives." "It was my HOA president," I said. "She's been harassing me about the snow pile." Rick gave me a knowing look. "HOA. I get calls like this all the time. People use the city as a weapon in their petty disputes. Don't worry about it. I'll close this out as unfounded." I thanked him and watched him drive away, feeling both relieved and angry. Brenda had actually called the city with a false complaint. That had to be some kind of violation or misconduct, right? I spent that evening researching Minnesota HOA laws more thoroughly. I discovered that HOA board members could be held personally liable for actions taken outside the scope of their authority or in bad faith. I also found information about filing complaints with the State Attorney General's office for HOA misconduct. But before I could decide on my next move, the situation took an unexpected turn. Wednesday morning, another massive snowstorm rolled through Thornfield. The forecast had been calling for it all week, but even the meteorologists were surprised by its intensity. We got hit with nearly 3 feet of snow in less than 24 hours, with drifts piling up even higher in some areas due to brutal winds. I spent most of Wednesday afternoon and evening working on clearing my driveway again. This time, the snow pile grew even larger. There was simply nowhere else to put it. My property line was where it had to go. By the time I finished around 9 o'clock that night, I was exhausted, frozen, and covered in snow. Thursday morning, I woke up to find 3 missed calls and 2 voicemails from Brenda. I didn't bother listening to them. I knew exactly what they were about. But when I looked out my front window, I noticed something interesting. Brenda's house was 3 doors down from mine, on the opposite side of the street. Her driveway had been plowed, but the plow had created a massive wall of compacted snow at the end of her driveway, blocking her from getting in or out. This was a common problem after big storms when the city plows came through. They had to push the snow somewhere, and it often ended up blocking driveways. Brenda's silver Lexus was in her driveway, trapped behind this wall of snow. She would need to dig it out before she could go anywhere. I went about my morning routine, made breakfast, started on my work emails. Around 10 o'clock, I heard a commotion outside and looked out to see Brenda standing in her driveway in her purple parka, shouting into her phone. She was gesturing wildly at the snow blocking her exit. Part of me felt a small twinge of sympathy. Digging out from behind a plow pile was brutal work. But most of me remembered the hell she had been putting me through over my perfectly legal snow pile, and I felt nothing but satisfaction. Then an idea began forming in my mind. It was petty. It was probably childish. But after everything Brenda had put me through, I couldn't help myself. I had a friend named Marcus who owned a small landscaping and snow removal business. He had a dump truck and loader and did snow hauling for commercial properties. I gave him a call. "Marcus, how much would you charge to move a large pile of snow from my property to a different location?" Marcus laughed. "Depends on how much snow and where you want it moved. What are you thinking?" I explained the situation with Brenda and my idea. Marcus was quiet for a moment, then burst out laughing. "Man, that's cold. Pun intended. But look, I can't help you do anything illegal or that could get you or me sued." "It wouldn't be illegal," I said. "I'm moving snow from my property to a public street location. Technically, the snow would just be positioned near the curb, like how the plows leave it. I'm not blocking her driveway directly. I'm just adding to what's already there from the plows." Marcus thought about it. "You know what? I've dealt with my own HOA nightmares. If you're sure this won't come back to bite either of us, I'll do it for $300. But if anyone asks, this was just a standard snow removal job." "Deal," I said. Marcus showed up Friday afternoon with his loader and dump truck. The machine was massive, loud, and incredibly efficient. Within an hour, he had scooped up my entire snow pile and moved it to the truck. Then we drove down the street to where Brenda's house was. The plow had already created a substantial barrier at the end of her driveway. Marcus positioned the loader and began depositing my snow along the curb in front of her property, carefully adding to the existing plow pile. The result was a massive, dense wall of snow that extended at least 15 feet wide and 6 feet high directly in front of her driveway entrance. It was beautiful in its perfect petness. Brenda's car was still trapped in her driveway, and she had apparently hired someone to dig her out because there was a teenager with a shovel working on the barrier. But when Marcus finished depositing the additional snow, the kid took one look at the new mountain and actually threw his shovel down in frustration before getting in his truck and driving away. Marcus and I tried not to laugh too obviously. "That should keep her busy for a while," Marcus said as he prepared to leave. "But seriously, Aaron, watch your back. This is hilarious, but she's going to lose her mind. Let her, I said. She's been making my life miserable over nothing. Now she can see what actual inconvenience looks like. I paid Marcus in cash, and he headed out. I went back inside my house and tried to focus on work, but I kept glancing out the window to see if Brenda would notice her new snow problem. I didn't have to wait long. Around 5 o'clock, I heard a car door slam and looked out to see Brenda walking down her driveway toward the street. She was wearing her purple parka and winter boots, and she had clearly intended to drive somewhere. But when she reached the end of her driveway and saw the massive wall of snow blocking her way, she stopped dead in her tracks. For a long moment, she just stood there, staring at it. Then she started walking around it, examining it from different angles, as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. I watched as the realization seemed to dawn on her that this wasn't just plow snow. This was fresh snow that had been deliberately placed there. She pulled out her phone and made a call. Even from inside my house, I could hear her raised voice, though I couldn't make out the words. She was furious. I should probably have felt guilty, but I didn't. All I felt was a deep sense of satisfaction. Brenda had spent weeks making my life difficult over something completely harmless, and now she was getting a taste of her own medicine. The weekend was surprisingly quiet. I saw Brenda outside several times, trying to chip away at the snow wall with a shovel, but it was slow going. The snow Marcus had moved was compacted and heavy, mixed with the dense plow snow. It would take hours of hard labor to clear it all, or she would need to hire someone with heavy equipment. Monday morning, I got the call I had been expecting. It was Janet Morrison from the HOA board, and she sounded stressed. "Aaron, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Did you have anything to do with the snow blocking Brenda's driveway?" I chose my words carefully. "I had snow removed from my property, yes. I hired a professional to haul it away, which is exactly what Brenda suggested I do." "And where did that snow get taken?" "I believe it was deposited along the public street curb, which is where plow snow typically goes. That's a matter between the hauling company and the city." Janet sighed. "Aaron, come on. We both know what happened here. Brenda is absolutely livid. She's threatening to call the police, file a restraining order, sue you personally, and bring charges through the HOA." "On what grounds?" I asked. "I removed snow from my property using a licensed and insured contractor. If she has an issue with snow on the public street, she needs to take that up with the city." "This is escalating out of control," Janet said. "Can't you two just work this out like adults?" "I tried being an adult," I replied. "Brenda is the one who decided to turn a pile of snow into a federal case. She threatened me with fines, filed a false complaint with the city, and has been harassing me for weeks. I finally did exactly what she asked and had the snow removed from my property. If she doesn't like where it ended up, that's not my problem." Janet was quiet for a moment. "She's calling an emergency board meeting for tomorrow night. You should probably be there." I hung up feeling a mix of anxiety and determination. This situation had spiraled into something much bigger than I had anticipated. But I wasn't going to back down now. Brenda had started this war, and I was going to see it through. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for Tuesday evening at 7 o'clock, same as before. When I arrived at the clubhouse, the parking lot was packed. Word had gotten around the neighborhood about the snow incident, and it seemed like everyone wanted to see the showdown. Inside, the meeting room was standing room only. Brenda sat at the center of the board table, looking like she wanted to murder me with her eyes. Janet, Douglas, and the other 2 board members flanked her, all looking uncomfortable. I found a seat near the back and waited. Brenda called the meeting to order, dispensing with all the usual formalities. "We're here tonight to address a serious incident involving Aaron Daniels and his deliberate obstruction of my private property." Several people in the audience murmured. Someone near me whispered, "This is better than Netflix." Brenda continued, her voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "Last Friday, Mr. Daniels hired a company to move snow from his property and deliberately dumped it in front of my driveway, blocking my access for multiple days. This was a clear act of harassment and retaliation, and I demand that the board take immediate action." I stood up. "May I respond to these accusations?" "You'll have your turn to speak," Brenda snapped. Douglas Chen interrupted. "Brenda, let's keep this civil. Aaron should be able to defend himself." Brenda looked like she wanted to argue, but she gestured curtly at me. "Fine. Speak." I walked to the front of the room, making sure I looked calm and composed even though my heart was racing. "I removed snow from my property using a licensed contractor, which is exactly what Brenda suggested I do. Where that contractor chose to deposit the snow along public city streets is not within my control or responsibility. If Brenda has an issue with snow on city property, she needs to contact the city, not the HOA. "Don't play games with me," Brenda hissed. "You deliberately had that snow dumped in front of my house to harass me." "Do you have any evidence of that?" I asked calmly. "Did you see me direct the contractor to place snow in any specific location? Do you have any documentation showing that I violated any law or HOA rule?" Brenda sputtered, clearly not expecting me to push back so directly. "I don't need evidence. Everyone knows what you did." "Actually, you do need evidence if you're going to accuse me of harassment or bring any kind of formal action. And the fact is, I did nothing wrong. I removed snow from my property, which you insisted I do. The location where the contractor disposed of that snow on public property is between him and the city." Tom, my retired police officer neighbor, stood up from the audience. "I'd like to say something if that's allowed." Brenda looked irritated but nodded. Tom addressed the board. "I've been a resident here for 12 years and served on this board for 6 of those years. What we're seeing here is a clear abuse of HOA authority. Brenda has been harassing Aaron over a pile of snow that violated no specific, measurable rule. When Aaron stood up for himself, Brenda escalated by filing a false complaint with the city. And now she wants to punish him for removing the snow from his property, which is what she demanded in the first place. This is exactly the kind of petty tyranny that gives HOAs a bad name." Several people in the audience applauded. Brenda's face was now a deep shade of crimson. "How dare you," she said to Tom. "I have dedicated countless hours to this community." "And use that dedication as an excuse to bully people," Tom shot back. "You need to be removed from this board before you cause even more damage." The room erupted in voices, some supporting Brenda, others calling for her resignation. Douglas Chen tried to restore order by raising his hands and calling for quiet. "Listen, everyone, this has gotten way out of hand," Douglas said. "The fact is, Aaron didn't violate any HOA rules by having his snow removed. And Brenda, with all due respect, you've been pursuing this matter with an intensity that seems personal rather than professional. I think we need to drop this entire issue and all move on." Janet Morrison nodded vigorously. "I agree. This has become toxic and divisive. We're supposed to be a community, not warring factions." But Brenda wasn't done. She stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "If this board won't take action, I'll handle this myself. Aaron Daniels, consider yourself on notice. I will make sure you regret ever crossing me." The room went silent. That had sounded uncomfortably like a threat. Tom stood up again. "Brenda, you need to calm down. You're letting this consume you. Stay out of this, Tom, Brenda spat. She grabbed her bag and stormed out of the meeting, leaving the remaining board members looking stunned. Douglas adjourned the meeting, and people began filing out, many of them stopping to tell me they supported me or to share their own horror stories about Brenda. I thanked them and headed to my car, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that Brenda's threat had given me. Over the next few days, things remained tense but quiet. Brenda had finally managed to get her driveway cleared, though I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she had to pay a snow removal company over $800 to bring in a loader and truck to haul it all away. Part of me felt guilty about that expense, but mostly I just felt that she had brought it on herself. Then Thursday morning, I woke up to find both of my rear tires slashed. I stood in my driveway, staring at my Honda Accord sitting lopsided on its rims, and felt a cold rage building inside me. This had gone way beyond petty HOA disputes. This was vandalism. This was criminal. I called the Thornfield Police Department and filed a report. 2 officers showed up within 30 minutes. I explained the situation, including the ongoing dispute with Brenda and her threat at the board meeting earlier that week. The officers took photos, asked about security cameras, which I unfortunately didn't have, and asked if I had any proof that Brenda was responsible. No direct proof, I admitted, but given the timing and her threat, she's the obvious suspect. One of the officers, a young woman named Officer Sarah Blake, nodded sympathetically. I understand, but without evidence or witnesses, there's not much we can do. We'll file the report and increase patrols in the neighborhood, but you might want to consider installing cameras. I thanked them and called my insurance company to file a claim. 2 new tires were going to cost me over $300 after my deductible. I also immediately ordered a security camera system online and paid for next-day delivery. Friday afternoon, I spent several hours installing cameras covering my driveway, front door, and backyard. If Brenda or anyone else tried anything else, I would have evidence. That evening, Tom came by to check on me. He looked concerned and tired. "I heard about your tires," he said. "Aaron, I'm worried this is going to keep escalating. Brenda is not stable. I've been hearing things through the neighborhood." "What kind of things?" Tom hesitated. "Apparently she's been going door to door, trying to rally people against you. She's calling you a troublemaker and claiming you're trying to destroy the neighborhood. Most people aren't buying it, especially after that board meeting, but she's got a few allies. And there's something else." "What?" "Her husband Mark is apparently furious about the whole situation. He's a big guy, works in construction. I just want you to be careful." I felt a knot form in my stomach. The idea of Brenda's husband getting involved added a whole new dimension to this mess. "Thanks for the warning. I've got cameras now and I've documented everything. If anything else happens, I'm going to push for charges." Tom nodded approvingly. "Good. And if you need anything, call me. I mean it." After Tom left, I spent the evening reviewing my security camera footage to make sure everything was working properly. The system had motion detection and night vision, and I could access it from my phone. I felt a little safer knowing I had this protection, but I was also deeply troubled that it had come to this point. The weekend passed without incident. I barely left my house except to check my mailbox and do a grocery run. I kept expecting something else to happen, but everything remained quiet. Monday morning, I was working at my kitchen table when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but it had a local area code, so I answered. "Is this Aaron Daniels?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes, who's calling?" "This is Detective Linda Harris with the Thornfield Police Department. I'm calling about the vandalism report you filed last week. Do you have time to answer a few questions?" My heart jumped. Of course. Did you find something? We've been following up on several incidents in your neighborhood. Can you tell me more about your dispute with Brenda Patterson? I spent the next 20 minutes explaining everything that had happened, from the initial complaint about my snow pile to the slashed tires. Detective Harris listened carefully, occasionally asking clarifying questions. Have you had any other incidents since the tires? She asked. No, everything's been quiet. I installed security cameras, though, just in case. That's good. Mr. Daniels, I want to be straight with you. We're looking into Miss Patterson for several complaints from other residents. You're not the first person she's had conflicts with. There's a pattern of behavior here that's concerning. If anything else happens, I want you to call me directly. She gave me her direct number, and I saved it in my phone. After we hung up, I felt a strange mixture of validation and concern. On one hand, it was good to know that the police were taking this seriously, and that I wasn't alone in having problems with Brenda. On the other hand, the fact that there was an actual police investigation into her behavior suggested that things were even worse than I had realized. Tuesday evening, I was watching TV when my phone buzzed with an alert from my security cameras. I opened the app and saw someone walking up my driveway. It was dark, but the night vision showed a large man in a heavy jacket and baseball cap. I watched as he approached my garage door and appeared to be examining it. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out something I couldn't quite make out in the grainy footage. My heart was pounding. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? Someone is on my property, acting suspicious. I have them on security camera right now. The dispatcher took my information and said officers were on the way. I kept watching the camera feed. The man was now at my front door, and he appeared to be trying the handle. When it didn't open, he moved to the side window and cupped his hands to look inside. This was beyond vandalism. This was attempted break-in. I heard sirens in the distance, and the man on my camera must have heard them too because he suddenly took off running down the street. I switched to my front camera and watched him disappear into the darkness. 2 police cars arrived within minutes. I met the officers outside and showed them the camera footage on my phone. Even in the grainy night vision, the man's size and build were clear. That looks like it could be Mark Patterson, one of the officers said, glancing at his partner. Brenda Patterson's husband. You know him? I asked. We've had a couple encounters with him. Nothing major, but he's got a temper. We'll follow up on this. They took copies of the footage and filed another report. One of the officers, a veteran named Officer Mike Torres, pulled me aside. Mr. Daniels, this situation is clearly escalating. I know Detective Harris is already involved, but you need to seriously consider getting a restraining order against both Brenda and Mark Patterson. This isn't just neighborhood drama anymore. Someone tried to break into your home. I nodded, feeling shaken. I'll look into it first thing tomorrow. After the police left, I couldn't sleep. I kept watching the security cameras, jumping at every small noise. This had gone so far beyond a dispute over a snow pile that it was almost surreal. All because Brenda Patterson couldn't handle someone standing up to her petty tyranny. Wednesday morning, I contacted a lawyer. Her name was Rachel Foster, and she specialized in property law and HOA disputes. I explained the entire situation over the phone, and she agreed to meet with me that afternoon. Rachel's office was in downtown Thornfield, in a small professional building near the courthouse. She was in her mid-40s, with sharp eyes and a confident demeanor that immediately put me at ease. After reviewing all my documentation, the police reports and the security footage, Rachel leaned back in her chair. "You have a very strong case for a restraining order," she said. "The escalating pattern of harassment, the vandalism, and now the attempted break-in are more than enough. We can file the petition this afternoon and probably get a temporary order within 48 hours. What about the HOA stuff? I asked. Can she still come after me through the board? Rachel smiled. After everything that's happened, if the HOA tries to fine or take action against you for that snow pile, we'll bury them in litigation. You've documented everything perfectly. They have no case. And honestly, after this gets out, I wouldn't be surprised if Brenda gets removed from the board entirely. We filed the petition for a restraining order that afternoon, naming both Brenda and Mark Patterson. The petition detailed every incident, included all the police reports, and attached the security camera footage. Rachel said a judge would review it and likely schedule a hearing within the next week. Thursday afternoon, I got a call from Detective Harris. "Mr. Daniels, we brought Mark Patterson in for questioning regarding the incident at your home. He denied being there, but when we showed him the security footage, he admitted it was him. He claims he was just trying to talk to you about your dispute with his wife, but the fact that he was trying to gain entry to your home undermines that explanation." "What happens now?" I asked. "We're charging him with attempted criminal trespass and stalking." Given his admission and the video evidence, the prosecutor feels confident about the charges. He'll be arraigned tomorrow. I wanted to let you know so you can take appropriate precautions. He's been released on bail with conditions that he stay away from you and your property, but you should still be careful. I thanked her and immediately called Rachel to update her. She said the criminal charges would strengthen our restraining order petition significantly. Friday morning, I had to appear in court for the restraining order hearing. Rachel met me at the courthouse, and we went through security together. The hearing was in a small courtroom on the 3rd floor. Brenda and Mark Patterson were both there with their own attorney, a stern-looking man in an expensive suit. Brenda looked like she had aged 10 years in the past few weeks. Her hair was disheveled, and she had dark circles under her eyes. Mark was a massive guy, easily 6'3" and 250 pounds, with a red face and angry eyes. The judge, an older woman named Judge Patricia Greenwood, reviewed the petition and all the supporting documents. Then she asked if anyone wanted to make a statement. Rachel presented our case methodically, walking through each incident and showing how the behavior had escalated from harassment to vandalism to attempted break-in. She emphasized the threat Brenda had made at the board meeting and Mark's admission to police that he had been at my property. The Pattersons' attorney tried to argue that this was all a misunderstanding, that his clients were being unfairly targeted, and that I had provoked the situation by deliberately blocking Brenda's driveway with snow. Judge Greenwood listened to both sides, then looked directly at Brenda and Mark. "I've reviewed all the evidence, including the police reports and security footage. Mr. Patterson, you admitted to police that you were on Mr. Daniels' property at night, attempting to access his home. That alone is grounds for a restraining order. Mrs. Patterson, your pattern of harassment and escalating threats are deeply concerning. The fact that your husband felt emboldened to take physical action suggests a toxic dynamic in this situation." She signed the restraining order, making it permanent for a period of 3 years. Both Brenda and Mark were ordered to stay at least 500 feet away from me and my property at all times, with exceptions only for unavoidable neighborhood situations where they were required to maintain that distance. I'm also recommending that the HOA board review Mrs. Patterson's continued service as president, Judge Greenwood added. This kind of behavior is unacceptable in any community leadership role. Brenda's face crumpled, and for a moment, I actually felt sorry for her. But then I remembered everything she had put me through and the feeling passed. As we left the courtroom, Rachel pulled me aside. "You should feel good about this. You stood up for yourself and prevailed. But be aware that the criminal case against Mark is still ongoing. You may need to testify at some point." "I'm prepared for that," I said. "Thank you for everything." Over the next few weeks, things slowly returned to normal. The neighborhood gossip mill was in overdrive, and everyone had an opinion about the situation. Most people were supportive of me, with several neighbors stopping by to share their own negative experiences with Brenda. The HOA board held a special meeting and voted unanimously to remove Brenda as president. Douglas Chen was elected as the interim president, and one of his first actions was to formally rescind the violation notice against me. He also announced that the board would be reviewing and clarifying all the bylaws to prevent subjective enforcement in the future. Brenda and Mark's house went up for sale in early March. I heard through Tom that they were moving to a different town, trying to start over. Part of me felt bad about that, but mostly I just felt relief that they would be gone. Mark's criminal case proceeded through the court system. In April, he pleaded guilty to attempted criminal trespass in exchange for probation and anger management classes. The stalking charge was dropped as part of the plea deal. I didn't have to testify, which was fine with me. I was ready to move on. By the time May arrived and the last of the snow finally melted, the whole ordeal felt like a distant nightmare. The infamous snow pile that had started everything was long gone, leaving behind just some slightly compacted grass that would recover over the summer. I had learned a lot through the experience. I learned that standing up to bullies, even when they have some authority, is important. I learned that documentation and evidence are crucial when dealing with disputes. And I learned that most people, when pushed too far by petty tyranny, will eventually push back. The new HOA leadership under Douglas Chen was a breath of fresh air. They focused on actual community issues rather than manufactured complaints. The board meetings became shorter, more productive, and far less dramatic. Several neighbors commented that the neighborhood felt friendlier and more relaxed without Brenda's constant surveillance and complaints. In June, I attended my first board meeting under the new regime. Douglas presented the revised bylaws, which now included specific measurable standards for everything from snow removal to landscaping to parking. The vague, aesthetic integrity language that Brenda had weaponized was replaced with clear guidelines that were fair and reasonable. "We want this to be a community where people feel comfortable in their homes," Douglas said. "Not a place where they're constantly worried about arbitrary enforcement actions. If we have standards, they need to be clear, objective, and applied consistently." The new bylaws passed unanimously, and several people applauded. Tom leaned over and whispered to me, "You started a revolution, Aaron." I laughed. "I just wanted to pile my snow somewhere." That summer was peaceful. I worked on my lawn, had some neighbors over for barbecues, and generally enjoyed not being at war with anyone. The Pattersons' house sold in July to a young family with 2 kids. They seemed nice and normal, and I welcomed them to the neighborhood without mentioning any of the drama. In August, I was doing some gardening when a car pulled up in front of my house. A woman got out, and it took me a moment to recognize her. It was Brenda. She looked different, calmer maybe, less severe. She approached slowly, staying on the sidewalk in compliance with the restraining order. "Aaron," she called out, "can we talk? I'll stay right here." I set down my gardening tools and walked to the edge of my property, maintaining the required distance. "What do you want, Brenda?" She took a deep breath. "I wanted to apologize for everything. I've been in therapy, working through some issues, and I've come to realize how out of control I was." The way I treated you and others in the neighborhood was wrong. I let the power of the HOA position go to my head, and I became the kind of person I never thought I'd be. I wasn't sure what to say. This was the last thing I had expected. Brenda continued, I'm not asking for forgiveness or for you to drop the restraining order or anything like that. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. What happened was my fault. I let a pile of snow turn into a war, and I almost destroyed my marriage and my life in the process. Mark is in counseling too. We're trying to rebuild. I studied her face, looking for any sign of manipulation or insincerity, but she seemed genuine. Thank you for saying that, I finally said. I hope things work out for you and Mark. She nodded, tears forming in her eyes. I hope someday we can both just remember this as a weird chapter that's over. Take care, Aaron. She got back in her car and drove away. I stood there for a long time, processing what had just happened. I hadn't expected an apology, and I certainly hadn't expected to feel any empathy for Brenda. But hearing her take responsibility and seeing her vulnerability reminded me that everyone has their struggles and breaking points. That fall, the HOA held its annual election for board positions. Tom decided to run again, and I actually considered running myself, but ultimately decided I preferred to stay out of HOA politics. The election brought in some new blood, younger families who were eager to make the community better without the authoritarian approach. By the time winter rolled around again and the first snow began to fall, I found myself actually looking forward to clearing my driveway. When the first big storm hit in December, I took my time with the snowblower, carefully pushing the snow to the side of my property. The pile that formed was probably just as large as the one that had caused all the trouble the previous year, but this time, no one complained. No violation notices appeared on my door. No one called the city with false reports. It was just a pile of snow, nothing more. I ran into Douglas at the community holiday party in December, and we laughed about how different things were now compared to a year ago. I still can't believe all that happened over snow, Douglas said, shaking his head. But I guess it was never really about the snow, was it? No, I agreed. It was about power and control and someone who forgot that being part of a community means respecting each other, not controlling each other. Well, we've learned from it, Douglas said. The board has bent over backward this year to make sure we're being fair and reasonable. I think we're building something good here. He was right. The neighborhood did feel different. People seemed more relaxed, more willing to talk to each other and work things out directly rather than running to the HOA with every minor complaint. There was a sense of actual community, rather than just a collection of houses governed by an arbitrary set of rules. As I drove home that night, past the decorated houses and the snow-covered yards, I reflected on everything that had happened. It had been a stressful, sometimes scary experience, but I had learned that standing up for yourself matters. I had learned that bullies, even ones with official titles and authority, can be challenged. And I had learned that communities work best when they're built on respect and reasonable standards, rather than fear and arbitrary enforcement. The restraining order against Brenda and Mark was still in effect, and they were living in a town about 30 miles away. I heard occasional updates through the neighborhood grapevine. They were apparently doing better, working on their relationship and trying to rebuild their lives. I genuinely hoped they found peace and learned from the experience. As for me, I was just happy to be living in a place that finally felt like home. The trauma of the previous winter had faded, replaced by a sense of stability and belonging. I had made real friends in the neighborhood, people like Tom who had my back when things got tough. The following spring, the new HOA board organized a neighborhood cleanup day. Dozens of residents turned out to pick up litter, touch up common area paint, and generally spruce things up. There was a barbecue afterward, and the atmosphere was friendly and cooperative. This was what a community was supposed to feel like. I was picking up trash near the entrance to the neighborhood when I found one of the old HOA violation notices that had blown into the bushes. It was dated from several years ago, citing someone for having their basketball hoop visible from the street. I crumpled it up and threw it in my trash bag, a small symbolic gesture that felt satisfying. That evening, sitting on my back deck with a beer, I thought about how a single pile of snow had changed so much. It had exposed the toxic leadership of our HOA, forced a community reckoning, and ultimately led to positive changes that made everyone's lives better. It had also taught me that sometimes you have to fight battles you never wanted to fight, not because you want conflict, but because standing up to unreasonable authority is the right thing to do. My phone buzzed with a text from Tom. "Hey, want to come over tomorrow for a barbecue? A few neighbors are coming by." I smiled and texted back that I'd be there. This was what community was supposed to be about. Neighbors connecting, supporting each other, and building relationships. Not petty rules enforcement and power trips. As the sun set over Thornfield, Minnesota, casting long shadows across my perfectly ordinary yard with its perfectly ordinary snow pile memories, I felt genuinely content. The war with Brenda Patterson and the HOA was over, and peace had been restored. More importantly, the community had learned and grown from the experience, emerging stronger and more united. Sometimes it takes a crisis to reveal what really matters. In our case, it took a pile of snow, a vindictive HOA president, and one stubborn engineer who refused to be bullied into submission. The result was a better neighborhood for everyone, with fairer rules, better leadership, and a renewed sense of what community actually means. I raised my beer in a silent toast to that ridiculous pile of snow that had started it all, then went inside to plan my garden for the coming summer. Life was good, the HOA was functional, and my driveway was mine to pile snow on however I wanted. That was all I had ever asked for, and it felt like victory.